So from my side, I'm Chris Schubert from TU Wien in Austria. So welcome to the afternoon session. On the title here, Fair Metrics and Data Quality. And just a pre-warning, it's not a technical session here. So this name originated from our former task forces, EOS task forces, or task force for with this title. Mark Wilkinson and I used to lead it, and in the end, so our approach was with this working group really to find assistance and to develop assistance to user community or to user communities here. And I'm very pleased that we were able to organize this session here together with Katrin and our panelists. And with this, I would like to hand over to Katrin. I give some announcements here. Sorry. Yeah, this is a short structure. What we thought it can work for this hour on discussion. And for any question you have, please use this link and put your question to the certain panelist here, and also a question in general regarding the assistance of fair metrics and data quality under this link or under this QR code. Yeah. And for this, I would like to hand over to Katrin Winkler from the European Commission, from the Open Science and Research Infrastructure Unit at Research RTE.
Yeah, many thanks for this introduction. Yes, I would like to give you a short introduction into the objectives of the session today. Let me just see if this works. Right. Yeah, we all know that, especially in the last decade there was considerable efforts have been made to define the FAIR principles and to better understand the requirements for their implementation in research practice, from the level of the individual researchers to institutional requirements, the definition of national standards, and also international harmonization. We are here now knowing or seeing why the principles themselves are well defined and understood. The degree of fairness of research outputs is still rather low, which can be detrimental in many ways, including, for instance, lower research quality, of course, inefficient research performance, and also limited multi-interdisciplinary research practice, which is would have not only a negative research impact, but also potential negative socioeconomic implications. What I can say, what we have been doing on the European level, or from the perspective of our programs or our work at the European Commission, we are supporting the implementation of FAIR principles through a variety of activities on the basis, for instance, of our EOSC partnership. We have been funding a number of projects that are directly related to the FAIR principles, to the implementation of the FAIR principles and their adoption. For instance, as you all know, FAIR Impact, or Trails, RDA Tiger, and many more to come, actually, already in this year. In addition, we are funding the establishment of a FAIR enabling a repository for EC-funded research results, the EU Open Research Repository that is going online as well currently. And in addition to that, we are also collaborating with our colleagues in our scientific departments, or the topical departments of the Commission, in a way that we include the FAIR principles and FAIR implementation practices in all kind of calls for proposals in the different areas of research. And then we are also combining the FAIR principles, FAIR implementation with other topical funding lines, for instance, as our EU missions. This is only to give a few examples of what we are doing on the EC side. In addition to this, there are also science policy activities, very broad ones on European level, a lot of science policy developments, but also internationally. Yes, so this, to cut a long story short, there are lots of initiatives and funding to develop the implementation of FAIR. But where do we stand in terms of research data productivity? This is a question we would like to address today. What are the barriers to implementing the FAIR principles and data quality standards in research data management? And do we have mechanisms to provide low barrier opportunities for the implementation of indicators from a funding perspective? So this is the objective and the focus of the 2-day session. As Chris said, not a very technical one, but more on a level of policy development. And I'm very glad that we can provide or start out this session with experts from 3 different sectors of the research domain. We have somebody from the funding sector, from the research institution or research infrastructure, and also from the private sector. So I'm very happy to have Jan Roden today here from the German Research Foundation that is centrally involved in the German National Research Data Infrastructure, NFDI. So we will have insights on how a funder is implementing indicator-based evaluation routines towards FAIR implementation. We have Carol Goebel representing the Elixir UK Bioscience Domain Infrastructure, and she will give us an example on how a digital infrastructure is enabling researchers and innovators to contribute to an open, accessible, and collaborative digital research landscape, including the development of services for FAIR assistance. And last but not least, Paul Butler from Springer Nature, providing us today with a commercial view and tools that support FAIR adoption. And after this short presentation, which will about 5 to 7 minutes each, we would like to have a very lively discussion with all of you to exchange on what was just presented and to have also some of your experience and best practices and opinions and views on that. And with that, I would like to start with the first talk, which is by Jan Roden.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Perfect. Let's begin with my presentation. I want to remind you of something that's quite important to start with, the fact that data quality and fairness aren't the same. And you see they aren't the same because the slide is simply a bit stretched to the side. What I want to stress is that fairness, as we all know, is mainly related to adherence with 16 fair data principles, thus to information technology. Of course, there's the exception of our 1.3 that says meta and data should meet domain relevant community standards, but fairness refers mainly to information technology. Data quality, on the other hand, that is something that has so many definitions that the German Council for Information Infrastructures wrote a paper on it. I have a link here if you're interested. And all these definitions have one thing in common. They say that data quality depends on many different aspects regarding of who you ask. So it can depend on communities, on compliance with standard, etc., which means it is related to far more than information technological aspects only. Thus, we can conclude that data quality is highly relevant and can go well beyond data fairness. For us at the German Research Foundation, you see that both data quality and fairness are very, very important. And we have to ask ourselves the questions, how can we motivate people to ensure the fairness and high quality of their data? Now, we're not trying to force people because the German Research Foundation is about the community-driven element and about self-organization of science. We rather try a multi-level approach by providing information and support, for example, with a checklist for research data for orientation. We also included research data management in the guidelines for good scientific practice, which means good science includes sustainable research data management. And of course, there are funding programs where data quality and fairness are very important, in particular the National Research Data Infrastructure, where both is included in the funding criteria, in the templates for proposal and progress reports, and in the reporting element, the newly introduced supplementary data sheets for the consortia. Now, why did we create such a data sheet? We got the idea from the NFDI expert committee and the German Council for Scientific Information Infrastructures, who both stated that evaluation criteria for infrastructures are important, especially for the NFDI. And the expert committee had two questions for such criteria. First, what kind and level of maturity does the consortium and its community have? And second, how can we get a better idea of the work, publication, and service profile of a consortium and how those are being used? Therefore, we decided to create a data sheet that acts, and I want to stress that, as a supplement to the proposal and report, which means every data sheet is only complete if you look at the proposal it accompanies. And we had a lot of challenges preparing that data sheet. First of all, we have very different communities and consortia represented in the NFDI, from biology to linguistics, and all those has different ideas and needs for fairness and data quality. And we had to acknowledge that some elements are really hard to evaluate, to measure. Cooperation, for example, or community engagement are very hard to find out if we want to measure them. And also data quality and fairness are really, really hard to measure if you have so many different communities. What did we do? Well, we created a first draft and tried to get to talk to many different actors from Europe, but also from the NFDI itself. And we asked for feedback, and that feedback was really helpful. We revised the first draft by more than 90% and reduced its size by over 40%. And we also created not only data fields, but also more written text elements, free text fields. On the one hand, to submit an explanatory annex to define what data quality and fairness may be understood from the perspective of the addressed communities. And on the other, in the proposal, to provide really specific information on fairness and on data quality from the perspective of the consortium. What can we learn from that? We have learned that data quality isn't the same as fairness. Both is complex and quite relative, and it's both hard to evaluate and to measure. But what I want to stress is that we cannot force neither fairness nor data quality on communities. They have to be part of it, and we all together have to bring it to life. And that's why I want to invite you to our group. We should work on this together because research data management keeps evolving, so fairness and data quality indicators have to evolve, and the data sheet I just talked about will have to evolve. So let's join our group, and I want to start you off with the question, how to achieve fairness and high data quality from your perspective. Thank you very much, and I hand over to Carol.
So my talk is going to be what Jan said. So I'm speaking from the insights from a UK bioscience infrastructure. I'm joint head of Node of Felix UK, and we've been working on we've been working on a, thank you for waving at me, on a new infrastructure, which is just starting. So this is an investment from the digital research infrastructure community, from the funding councils in the UK Research and Innovation, around building a bioscience commons in the UK. So it's to build a biocommons of data and computational methods. And it's effectively joining the dots of lots of existing research data tools and services to make them accessible and to provide people support. And you could call it a mini EOSC if you wanted. Okay, so we have a wide range of other digital research infrastructures in the UK in the same sort of field and also cross-related to do with mass spectrometry and health data and phenomes for phenotypical representation of plants and all this kind of stuff. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So the first couple of things I'm going to say is what is that actually we're going to be doing, and then 3 reflections on metrics and assessments. The first is we're joining up services for fair assistance. Now, I'm quite anti-fair metrics. I'm actually very pro-fair assistance rather than fair assessment. So for me, this was what was important. I'm one of the authors of the FAIR principles, so I can brag about that. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to create an environment for creating a contract to explicitly discuss how fair you were, not to actually make it a penalizing activity. So we wanted to go back to that. So I want to do fair, not as a carrot, not as a stick, but as a side effect. as a nudge, so you don't notice it. It's built into the infrastructures. So it's going to be embedded into this infrastructure components in the assemblage of these resources. The second thing is we're going to drive from analysis. We won't ask people to talk about fair data and fair sharing. Instead, we'll ask you make your data available in appropriate standards so that you can use a national analysis platform, because then you're getting some value proposition out of doing it, because you're getting some new access to novel ways of being able to do AI, novel ways of being able to do analysis. And we already have this infrastructure to create such an analytical environment because we built it in EOSC. We built it in EOSC Life, we built it in Neuroscience Gateway, we built it as part of the Elixir research infrastructure, and it's all fair digital object first. So that's the first comment. The second comment is, that's a bit strange, but never mind, is that we discovered that when we did the reviewing and we built a community socialization around developing the business case for this infrastructure, which was training and knowledge and community building were the prime things. So fair and getting fair right so that when you assess it, you are meeting your fair quality metrics, is you really need to do that training. And we had a training session just now, or a discussion around skills, and you need trainers, research software engineers, data stewards, community ambassadors, and so on. Really do that first. You can't do your use cases last. You have to do them first. So the most of the investment is actually in the area of people rather than infrastructure for that person. So here's my reflections. The first is on fair quality, which Jan has just basically said. We have this fair spectrum, use data once, throw it away, right the way through to it's reusable for everything everywhere. And as Jan said, this is actually the curve, because this is where fair and quality sit. It's just enough. What is the just enough? And that is community and task specific. So it's very hard to do metrics because you need to know the community and you need to know the task, right? So it's going to be a community specific patchwork. The second thing is, if you're working at this level, you're talking about institutions and research projects and what does fair and quality mean for them. And that's inner fair. That's fair for us. If you talk to individuals and research technical professionals, you rearrange the letters of fair to be I go far, which means what's in it for me, right? Because that's what you really care about. You don't really care about outer fair, which is fair for everybody else. And so biofair, this infrastructure, has to support each of these, and each has a different definition of fair, each has a different definition of quality. And finally, this is a picture from Brian Nosek, who runs the Center for Open Science and is the COS infrastructure. So cultural change is driven by benefits. So if we're going to do fair metrics and we're going to do fair assessment, because we're going to make things fair better, then we need to have the benefits. And that's not about measuring the actual fairness of the data. It's about measuring the impact. Right. So this picture is the 5 stages or 5 areas of how to get an infrastructure really embedded in a community, make it required, make it rewarding, make it normative, make it easy through training, and make it possible through infrastructure. But the why has got nothing to do with fair. Fair is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. It's actually AI readiness, and it's actually competitive advantage. That's the way you get your researchers interested, is competitive advantage. So I'm rewriting this picture, and this is the driver behind biofair. Make it useful to me. Reduce the time and effort required to do the work. Make the infrastructure streamlined, right? So I don't keep bumping into barriers all the time, and provide me stewards and processes and pre-cooked knowledge that means I can rapidly do this, and embed it and partner straight away from communities. So this is how we're going to be developing our fair metrics in biofair, by actually embedding it so you don't even know that the fair metrics are happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Hello everyone, I'm Paul Butler, the Solutions Specialist for Protocols.io, which is Springer Nature's latest method development platform. I'd like to thank the team for having me on today, and I'd like to thank you all for joining and make it clear at this point that all views are my own and not those of Springer Nature's. That was a strict message from comms team. It would be great, before we carry on, to find out who is in the audience today. So if any of the following job roles apply to you, please put your hand up. Do we have any funders in here? A few. Do we have any people working at the lab or at the bench? Only one? Interesting. Do we have any PIs? People working for government, if they're allowed to say. People from the private sector. And Federation employees. Okay, thank you. And a quiz question before we begin. Who knows who wrote the original FAIR paper and published it? You're not allowed. Carol's not allowed to answer. Yep. Second row. Correct. And when was it published? Yes. And anyone know the journal? Go on, Carol.
It's scientific data.
Correct.
Do you want me to tell you the article type?
No. We have to get through the session. So what you can see up in front of you today is a research paper compared with a research protocol. My perspective will mainly be from that of reusability. And what you can see here is where the word count has just been distributed between these two things. So on the left-hand side, you've seen 50% go into the result in the research paper, and on the right-hand side, we've got nearly 50% in the method. To me, one of these is much easier to reuse than the other. But I think what's more important than that is the reason that we see this time and time again. It's due to lack of time and resource. It's due to restrictive word counts, and possibly I should hold my hands up there. It's due to lack of information around what's available and when. But more importantly, the real issue, I think, lies in the challenges and what we expect from researchers and scientists. We expect scientists to be experts now, and over the last 2 days I've heard this again and again, experts across the board and be able to get everything correct each and every time. So what I want to look at today is how we can provide solutions to help with the ever-growing list of challenges. What you see here is the problem magnified. So this is a method section taken from a Frontiers in Virology paper. It's what we call a static document. So if you see the protocol was first online in 2016, the research paper was published in 2022. That means there's 6 years worth of research that's been attributed to this topic, which we aren't able to put our finger on, and therefore it's not findable. What's more is that's 2 sentences of method condensed from 8 pages of instruction. It looks like 2 paragraphs, but it's a screenshot on a tablet. It doesn't link out to any data, therefore there's no interoperability taken from this. Again, really, really difficult to reuse and reproduce and build on the science from this particular piece. And finally, from me, this is the research workflow, as I'm sure you're all aware. The reason it's up in front of you here today is because I want you to be thinking about a question as we speak through the hour. Can we seriously expect scientists and researchers to get this process correct each and every time? Look at some of the words in there. Find existing protocols. Repeat as many times as necessary. All things related to findable, reusable. What I'm trying to say here is that we're in a difficult environment and we need to look at ways we can make things easier for people in that environment.
Many thanks, everybody, for keeping also on time. So may I invite you to go to the panel, please? Also Chris, who will take part in the panel and help me in the moderation if he wants to. Yes. Okay, thank you very much for all contribution. You had also, you had now a first impression from different viewpoints, and I would like to invite you to also to participate in the discussion where we would like to discuss the potential benefits, individual incentives that infrastructures can provide, like the NFDI consortia, for instance, policymakers, funding agencies, and publishers. And we would like to share best practices, your experiences also, and potential challenges. Maybe as the warming up question to the panel, from your perspective, we have heard a view, already a few challenges you were mentioning, and also experiences from Carol, but also from Jan. From your perspective, what are the current barriers to implementing FAIR principles and data quality standards in research data management, and especially how could they be addressed? If you just would...
Is this on? Yeah, it
Yeah.
works. Well, I believe we already heard a few things. We have many different communities who all have their own idea of FAIR and of data quality. And if we really wanted to bring it up on a higher level so that community overarching data quality and fairness is possible, we cannot enforce it. We can only help the communities to describe, to reflect on it, and we give them, as Carol said, the benefits to make their data fair. That is the shortest way. Show them the benefits, train them, show them how it's done, then they will do it on themselves. What I don't believe in are external factors like enforcing people to be fair. We have that discussion for the NFDI, and we are trying not to do that. We are rather trying to motivate the communities to reflect and to describe what their idea of fairness is, because that's the first step.
Yeah, I have very similar ideas, of course. I mean, we've used lots of carrots and we've used lots of sticks, and sometimes the carrot is very big, so you can use it as a stick, but it's still a stick. And but actually, most researchers in research performing organizations are very time restricted and don't have many resources, typically don't have a lot of access to data stewards, not yet anyway. So they're trying to be expert researchers whilst being expert data managers, and this is unrealistic until we can really streamline the data management activities. So this is why in BioFair we're focusing on embedding automatically FAIR activities so that it comes with the game, it comes with your analysis, and also spending a lot of investment in people. So not making people become experts in FAIR, instead training people who are data stewards to be experts in FAIR, or motivating research performing organizations to have stewardship support. And this way it becomes much more of a team sport. So I think we have to move away from FAIR being the responsibility of an individual to FAIR being a team sport across the entire sector. The infrastructure plays a role, the researchers play a role, the stewards play a role, the university itself plays a role by recognizing the value of FAIR and putting it into promotion and review, for example, and the funders recognize it as well by providing the infrastructure, as indeed in the UK they are doing so, and continues to sustain the infrastructure so that people will be confident to change their practices because they're confident it will be still there when they've changed their approaches. So it's a FAIR takes a village approach. And at the moment, the barrier is we keep on aiming at individuals, we keep on aiming at one of those stakeholders, we need to aim at the whole collective.
And coming back maybe to Jan, is there already, with regard to data stewardship and training modalities, is that already being sufficiently implemented?
Well, we see the basis for it, but I think data management has changed in the realm, and Carol described it very well, I think. A few years ago, we just had the idea that we call someone who comes to the village and solves the problem for the researchers, which is not possible anymore because we have research software, which is a sector that's very important, with its own rules. We have AI, and Paul showed us we have protocols. So it's very hard for even a data steward who is well-versed in many things to take care of all of that. So what I think is we need embedded data management of many people in the project. Everyone has to take part, and we have to have people who are not only there for 6 months to solve a problem, but to really be part of the whole process from the start to the end. So if we can provide that, I think we need new ways of funding. The NFDI could be a start of it, but I do not know if it's sufficient for all, because we have so many communities, and we have consortia who address many communities, but at the state right now cannot address all. So I think we're getting there, but we still have a long way towards the village.
And I would add a couple of things on that. 2 points, really. We need to make it as easy as possible. I don't know if anyone was in for the talk before this session, but it was mentioned that it's not the most exciting process. It can be seen as a box-ticking process, and if that's the opinion of the individual at the time, and then my second point comes to incentivization, if they see it as a box-ticking process with no incentive and no outcome, there's not much incentive to go and do it. If we can tie it to something that's relatable, so job prospects further down the line, recognition, showing where the data is reused, so exposure for that individual, then there's more incentive to start looking at it as something that will benefit that person that's there in the moment doing it.
I think to follow on that, we're changing the narrative a bit from, instead of saying, is your data fair, saying, is your data processable by this piece of analysis? Because that's an immediate incentive. Okay, so this is called, what's it called? Paternal liberalism, I think. It's where you actually redesign the process around what's the value to you, and then you nudge people in the direction that you want. So if you want to have fair data, you don't say make your data fair. Instead, you say you make your data so that I can analyze it. Make your data so it's AI ready. Make your data so that it's publishable. And the fair just comes along for the ride.
But sometimes it's difficult if we are speaking of very different domains, cross domains, for instance. Do you have an experience which kind of incentives one could, or from your perspective, as institutional perspective, with kind of incentives we may provide for providing cross domain implementation of FAIR principles?
Well, the NFDI is actually trying to do something that overarches different domains, and we have consortia who have very different domains under one roof, let's say it. And they incentivize it by saying, first of all, that it's a wonderful community you're part of because it's a wonderful endeavor. And second, they show with use cases what can be done with data to motivate people to make their data fair. So they provide examples of what happens if you connect different dots from different places. And that helps actually communities to see that there is a benefit from it. And a bit what Carol said before. So you should not force communities to be fair. You show them the benefits, what happens when they make their data reusable. And if you show showcases that go beyond one single community, that has an even greater effect. In the NFDI, we've had that. We have projects where, for example, people from biodiversity and from object science, from archaeology work together on objects, and you can see what the idea of working on object can all include. So,
and what are the measures, maybe coming back to NFDI? How do you incentivize to develop shared standards and metrics? I know that the NFDI is promoting very much collaboration between also the consortia.
For one, this part of the data sheet, we asked consortia to elaborate what kind of cooperation they have and to describe to us where do they work with the community, with other consortia. And we also asked them to build a common infrastructure, a common architecture for it, and to discuss what has to be the backbone of the infrastructure. And their community come together, they have to reflect on their demands, and thus they develop a shared idea of something that goes beyond their community. To name one point.
Okay. So I would like to involve the audience if they wish. So what are maybe your own experiences or your questions to the panel? Are there already questions in the online chat? I actually don't see this here. Ah, there we go. Okay. So Vinny, do you want to read?
Waiting for them. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we had one question here from the very beginning that had a lot of votes, what should the impact metrics for data, what should be the impact metrics for data sets? Are citations, views, downloads the only ones?
It's a really good question. It's also the same for software, actually. What is the impact for software? Now, I was at a funders of research software workshop for 4 days, and the entire workshop with all these funders from Chan Zuckerberg and so on was entirely about what is impact, because it's hard to measure. You know, it's impact that is just these kind of things that you can count. Well, we all know that things that you account, you don't necessarily count, and the things that count are the things that are uncountable, because they're the things that are intangible. They're things that actually, yeah, so you've downloaded the data set, but did anybody use it? Was it a bot that did the downloading? Particularly in software, that's one big issue. So views, downloads don't actually translate. They translate into popularity, they translate into awareness, but do they actually translate into impact, that you did something with it? So I think here we have to have a mixed portfolio of numbers like this, but also stories. So it's important to gather what are the stories of people using the infrastructure. So if I'm building a new infrastructure, I have communities, then it's important for me to collect right from the get-go the stories of the research investigations that were achieved because the data was fair. And that is really compelling, more compelling from an impact point of view than just counting what can be counted. Of course, we do that too. But maybe you have some better ideas, Paul.
I was just going to add that I think we use all of those metrics we can use, yes, and they're an easy way to look at it. But if we look at it, was it used in the original format? How long did it take to find, and how did it contribute to that research process? Which are harder things to measure. They would come up more in discussion, but then it comes down to exposure. How many people did use the data set? So I think you have to take into account both quantitative and qualitative.
And I also add that in my last slide, which I didn't mention, one of the things I really wanted to measure wasn't the metric, the fairness of the data or the fairness of the software, but actually how much faster we went. So was it just easier? What was the ease? So how hard was it before you started? And how hard is it now after you've got the infrastructure, or after you've got the data? Because I think there's something around the process itself that has to be improved by all of our infrastructures. So I would like to have metrics that say, well, it was 3 times faster for me to be able to do this because I could find a protocol and then I could reuse it. And that's not so much to do with the impact of the protocol or the impact of the data, it's to do the impact of the entire infrastructure in order to be able to use that data and to use that protocol.
And it comes down to the awareness of people knowing what's available and when.
Well, and I would add that even that is relative, because you can have a community that is very small and you have a data set that has 15 downloads, and it may be a lot. And if you count that, you don't count every possible use. I've seen projects who published a lot, who said no one uses us, only to find out that there was another project who analyzed the abstracts that were not downloaded, they copied from the catalog, and they made a whole new project out of it. So measuring has its limits. So success stories, that's something that should be collected, or user stories. But those are rather hard to measure because they're descriptive. So maybe we should focus less on measuring and more on describing what happens, because we may get a more complete picture of what actually happens and what fairness can be.
But this is, of course, hard, especially as a funder, right, to evaluate. So do you have any comments to that? How do you, from your side, maybe implement it, or what are experiences on that?
That was a bit the start of the data sheet. We actually transformed many fields when we wanted a number to a descriptive field, so that the NFI consortia could describe the positions, the perspective of the communities a bit better. And from the perspective of the funder, we have to distinguish 2 things. So we have to provide politics with numbers, because that's how they work. So you have to make a decision to provide money for an infrastructure, for example, and we have to show them that the money is well spent. They're all for fairness, but in the end they also want something they can put a finger on. Those are the numbers. On the other end, we have to provide a narrative, and that narrative is very much more important than numbers for the communities. So I believe we have to do both. We have to provide numbers describing the limitations they have, and we have to provide success stories in the light of the different communities and their specific needs. That's why it has to be flexible, because communities change, and that is why even the numbers we have today may not work tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have a second question? I'm sorry, can I add something? Yes, sure.
Regarding the possible metrics, because we've been talking about it from my perspective, about the slightly philosophical aspects of what is impact, how to measure it, but I like to follow Carol's way of thinking about what tangible we get out of fair data itself. So the other ideas that you can take with yourself about the possible impact metrics, whatever we regard behind the impact phrase, is the interoperability ones. So for example, how many scientific disciplines can be able to discover your data via the metadata you offer? There are some ideas about how to measure that. Of course, it's not perfect, but this is the way to go, the interoperability. How many people can use the data set that you produced? So this regarding the impact. How many infrastructures, how many processing tools will be able to process your data? This kind of metrics can be also the way to measure the impact.
Okay.
Yeah, I would call this kind of potential. It's
We
like
don't know how to do that completely now, but I believe that this is the way to go. Understanding how usable, how processable the data set is a way of measuring some kind of an impact.
It's like a prospective impact. Yeah.
Maybe from the view of a publisher, Paul, how does Springer Nature ensure that the research it publishes adheres to standards of data transparency, reusability, and quality?
It's difficult. One of the things we have is a single data policy across all journals. So we make sure that people are aware of what that is and how it works. We are making data availability statements more mandatory in more areas. And I think going back to what this person just said, making things more interoperable. So if you take protocols.io, for example, we've integrated that with ELNs. We are able to push and pull data sets from those. We've integrated with OSF. We have integrations with CodeOcean and Figshare. So I think more and more, when it comes to looking at how we do this and how we make things easier, it's when you come to build something or when you come to an idea, rather than looking at it in isolation, you think how it starts to work with everything else that's existing in the community, and then start to not too much, but modify your product or service so that it can work in 5 years' time and 10 years' time with the other existing tools.
Thank you. Do you have another question?
Yes.
From the audience? Oh, there's no hand. Yeah, maybe, or... Yeah,
yeah, thank you. Christian Schmidt from Heidelberg. I'm a biologist by training, but now a project manager in an NFTI project. I want to go a little bit more along the same road that was now in the question already, and that also may resonate with this provocative question about which ERC grant winner has built a career on for research data. And that goes to really ask the question, I like the idea of saying we do go along the incentives that the researchers need. And you said very beautifully, I go far. But in a research funding scheme in which I go far can mean for the moment, I know I will ultimately only go far if I now have this immediate publication benefit. And as long as I can publish this now without the data having all the tedious work of making it fair, it's still published out. So for the moment, that's my personal perspective of being fair. Then on the larger ethical view of making research more reproducible, more reliable, so that it not only serves the benefit of the researcher, but the society, isn't it also okay that we try to enforce and say, you are now obliged to do it, even though for the moment you are in this transition phase of not seeing the personal benefit yet, until we have changed from talking about fair data and open science, until we only talk about science, and that means implicitly open science and fair data.
Yes.
Thank you.
But a slightly longer answer, otherwise that's a bit of a cheat. Yeah, I mean, the Pear paper came out 10 years ago. And so we're in the first phase. It takes a long time to change research culture. And we're still in that period. I mean, you know, was it Max Planck who said science progresses through a series of funerals? And I think this is an example of that. It takes a long time. And it's a cultural change across the board. So it's very difficult to ask a young, enthusiastic, early career researcher who's doing an ERC grant, oh, by the way, you have to also do all of this, whilst their lab manager or PI or the university is then also saying, oh, and by the way, I want all these Nature papers out. And I'm not giving you any support for that, by the way. You know, you don't have any data support. So it's kind of, it goes back to the takes a village. You can't just give it all the responsibility. And if I'm an ERC candidate, I'm going to think, well, you know, in the end, I have to look after myself until I get all of that support. So I think it's incumbent upon us in order to be able to stop framing the question around the individual and frame the question around the collective support around that individual. You're completely right. We have a very competitive, dog-eat-dog kind of research environment that we've created. And we have to recognise it and support those who are currently in it until we change it.
What adds or what helps is actually making things easier. So if a researcher has less work making his or her data fair, he may be more inclined to do so. This may be by support or by easier tools, because let's face it, today a researcher has to know research data management, research software management, digital publishing. So life has become very complicated for them, and they have the same time because the day still has 24 hours, and researchers, at least from time to time, want to sleep. So we can only go so far as to support them. But in the end, and that's something we discussed on very high level, it's when there are grants to be set or when there are professorships that are out there, it's also a bit about the communities, not only to look at the Nature papers, but also the data sets that were published. And that's something that has to change inside of the communities. And I believe today that we're having that discussion, we're giving a light push toward that change. But as Carol said, it takes a long time.
So the infrastructure that we're building in the UK, we're going to do FAIR by stealth, by sneaking it in. But that required a significant investment by the UK funders to do it. And the funding which we won, we did not win on the scientific case. The bid, the case which is something like 400 pages long, 80 pages of actual case with 27 annexes, and the science is 4 paragraphs. Everything else is business case. It's all to do with the business and the economic case. But that's what we did, and then we got the investment, and so we can build it in so that you don't notice it. It's by stealth. And this is the only way we thought we could really do it that was fair. And I mean fair in the sense of fair as opposed to fair.
I would just add on to that. I won't make a stance on whether things should be mandatory or not, but you're not the first person that I've heard that from this week.
Okay, thank you very much. And I mean, I think one way is also to improve the structural preconditions for fair implementation, not only on institutional level and national level, but also we are here at the EOSC Symposium on the European level. And I was wondering, I mean, there has been so much work and very successfully led task force on fair metrics. Chris, would you like to add something from the perspective of you as from the task force?
Now, in the end, in this task force, or this former task force on fair metrics data quality, we had exactly the same discussion. So scoring versus assistance and supportive and being supportive. Yeah, and you can imagine the outcome of this discussion. Yeah, so we cannot describe it in a clear sentence, and of course it's also an issue of this kind of visibility here. So, but in the end, we got all this kind of similar understanding of how to use it in a research infrastructure, and not with this bunch of tools we have. So they are good, but yeah, what follows? Yeah, and it should be an easy, an easy access, and easy understand, it should be easy understood how to use it, and really be supportive from the beginning. Yeah.
I think that's one of the keys, is having it from the outset. If you try to build in something midway through a research process, or when you're developing something, it's going to be difficult. But if you go back to the previous session again, where we were talking about training and what age or at what level do you bring that training in, if you're embedding these things from early on, then it starts to become habit, starts to become automatic. Then if you combine that with the stealth approach, add AI and technology to that, you're starting to build a picture of how we can make things easier to do.
Thank you very much. The audience, do you have? Yes, please.
Hi, Stephanie Dawson from Science Open. I'm wondering if you see an opportunity here for actually encouraging or creating metrics around researchers, I wouldn't say publishing, but uploading their negative results, with the opportunity, with the idea of combining those, like as we saw with this wonderful talk, with the wonderful talk this morning, combining those with other researchers' data to actually maybe get a publication out of something that otherwise would be thrown away and is thrown away on a daily basis. I feel like we've been talking for 20 years about publishing negative results, and nobody's publishing negative results. Nobody's going to publish negative results. But there's a lot of data out there that is then, I think, unfortunately, not being tapped into. Do you see a possibility for metrics around that?
My slide that showed where the word count is distributed, and most of it going into the result, that a lot of the time is the reason for that. There's a big focus on the result and the exposure that gets you and the success that brings. And if we're not looking at that, what are we looking at? So one of the other things we can look at is the bad data, because it's never really bad. So what we need to do there is provide somewhere to put that data. So if we look at repositories, and it comes back to sometimes confidence, validation, young scientists not being comfortable putting those things out there because they think it will give them a step back. What we need to do for that to develop is provide solutions and areas where we can put that bad data and give it the exposure it needs. And that might be combining it with some type of explanation as to why it didn't work or how it can be used.
Okay, thank you very much. There's Savini.
Yes, so I do see the comment about Slido not being used. Okay, so we take that comment that's been up there, question that's been up there for a while. Will the slides be shared in open formats, or do we ask fairness only from researchers? Funny face.
Oh, well, my slides will be on Zenodo. I only just finished writing them, so yeah. But will they be in PDF only? No. Will you be able to hack them to your heart's content with a Creative Commons license? Yes. That's fine.
Yeah, I will cite you, and of course I will provide my slides, and if you like, I can also upload it in an open format. That's not the problem. But I think I want to stress openness is not the same as fair, and simply uploading them as a TXT file won't make them fair. So I believe it's the first step, but it doesn't mean that they're used or that they're found.
Okay, thank you. Another questions, Salvini?
Yes, this one seems to be popular as well. What is your stake regarding peer reviewing research data as a default, and where? Open peer review, internal peer review, within paper peer review, ...
So can you repeat the question, please?
What is your stake regarding peer reviewing research data as a default, and where?
I'm not from the editorial part of Springer Nature, so sorry to whoever asked that question, but I can't really comment on it.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are through with the questions online also, or do you have one last one?
Maybe one, we can do
Yeah,
one last
okay.
one. Yeah. So, which ERC grant winner has built her or his career on fair research?
Oh, we had this, right?
So the answer is I don't know. And I think that was going to this young man's point, really, about is there, and this is also to do with the impact stories issue. So it's a kind of two-sided question. And one way is the question says, well, you know, you don't build your career on fair data. That was this person's young man's question. I don't know your name, I'm sorry. I'm just pointing to you as a young man, because pretty well every man in the room is young compared to me. But on the other side, it's what's in the grant proposal that says, I acknowledge that I've built upon multiple public data sets. And the answer there is a lot, because you couldn't possibly get an ERC grant working in biosciences using bioscience data without having access to the archives of bioscience. So by default, you know, all of those ERC winners will have built on fair data. They just didn't call it fair data. They called it the, you know, ENA data archive. Anybody who's using the results of AlphaFold, that's built on fair data. That was built on 25 years of highly curated labeled data that people did just in case something clever like AI came along in order to be able to revolutionize the area. So I suspect you go to astronomy, every astronomer is building on prior open data that they have access to. So I would say a large number of the ERC grant winners are building on fair data, but they may not recognize it as such.
And maybe to get back to the negative results, not for this panel, but in the coffee break, we could talk about some cases where not having fair data created problems on difficult level, and maybe some even cost a Nobel Prize. So there are stories of that as well.
Many thanks. Many thanks to all our panelists. Many thanks to you for your interest. And I hand over to Chris for some last words.
My words are also really a great thing. Thank to you, thank to Katrin, and it was a pleasure to prepare this session with the same discussion, interesting discussion also before. Yeah, and to get in contact, here are our addresses and emails to keep on our discussion. Any question you have to us, please feel free and use this conference here and coffee breaks as well, yeah, for individual questions. Yeah, thank you and enjoy the break.